What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 3 of the Unclassified podcast. I'm Preston Stewart, joined by Ben Wheeler. We're recording this on Thursday, December 5th, 2024. Normally, or at least in our first 2 episodes, and the plan going forward is to record this on Fridays and then release it just like shortly thereafter. I'm doing a little traveling tomorrow and don't know if I'll be able to hop on. So we're doing it today, and that works out. But Ben, thank you for your flexibility, sir.
Of course. I mean, anything for you, Preston. I mean, you also, this travel is going to be a big deal. People are going to be very impressed. So I'm excited for you. Very proud of you as well. So it's going to be big stuff.
It's one of those where we'll wait for it to come together and actually happen before putting it out there publicly, but it should be a cool event. Now, the early recording actually works today because the world had exploded like 4 times over by Tuesday. So we've got plenty to talk about. And the one I was hoping to start out with, if it's okay with you, is South Korea, because I kind of put on my blinders, and we'll get into it in a minute, but by and large, I just pretended like nothing happened because I didn't have the brain power to get into it. Would you be able to explain what the hell happened in South Korea this week?
Of course. So the President Yoon, is very unpopular. He does not control the National Assembly, and so he is fighting with the Democrats there. They have their own Democrats, and he is fighting with them over the budget, but also, they're trying to impeach him. They're trying to impeach people in his cabinet. It's just not going too well for him. So he came up with this brilliant idea of like, well, if they're not going to pass my budget bill, I'm just going to declare martial law. So he declares martial law. He makes political activities, political parties illegal. He makes mass gatherings illegal. He tries to seize control of the media. And while all that's happening, the Korean Special Forces are now being sent to the parliament, to the National Assembly, to try to stop them from getting access to the building. But, parliament members are rushing to the building. They're jumping fences. They're actively fighting with the military in front of the building to enter. And so all that's happening, and they're trying to get in and declare the martial law illegal. South Korea has a very bad history of martial law. They've declared martial law more times than the United States has, and South Korea's only been around since 1948. So, and they've declared it 16 times. It's just,
they're good at it.
It's just brutality. Yeah, they're very good. But essentially, he does this. They break in, and so now there's this whole scuffle between the military and the people outside of the building. But then the military realizes that they have a quorum inside the National Assembly. So they attempt to break into the building. They land on it with helicopters. They're kicking in windows. And as soon as they gain access, the staffers had built barricades. They built barricades, and when they knock down the barricades, the staffers are spraying them in the face with fire extinguishers. And they're also like flashing them with strobe lights, throwing things at them. It is just an all-out fight. And then Parliament votes, and they say the martial law is illegal. And so the military is like, dang, you got us. So they just turn around and leave. Just like the most unmotivated coup force you've ever seen before. And it makes you wonder, is it really that easy? So they did that, and it's all over. And so then from now, we have the fallout from it. There are mass protests. People are calling for his impeachment, imprisonment, resignation. And they're singing impeachment carols, they're calling it, to the tune of Feliz Navidad. And in addition to that, Yoon is trying to do trying to save his image a little bit. So he is saying that he knew Parliament would overrule him immediately, but he just wanted to send a message that he could do it, but he's not actually trying to. So it was just a prank bro defense, or I was just testing you. His own party, right? His own party says that he declared martial law because he was lonely and that he needed someone to talk to. Which is, it happens. Yeah. Who hasn't declared martial law when they're lonely? So that's been going on. And, as you saw with the fighting, the military conscription of men in Korea worked against them because the people knew exactly how to fight back against the soldiers. And so it just was a complete draw for the 2 hours martial law existed. And in addition to that, now South Korea has to deal with fallout with the United States, who was not alerted of the martial law. I had no idea it was happening till he said it was happening. And they've also suspended temporary military drills as well as nuclear deterrence talks. So not looking good. He's probably going to be impeached. But in order to be removed, he needs 10 members from his party to defect.
I mean, this seems like the kind of thing that would get some people over the fence, but I don't know. Not a South Korea expert. I'm going to ask some dumb questions so what I was getting at earlier is this happened. Like I got the notification that martial law had been declared as I was like wrapping up the research for a Syria civil war video. And I'm not very smart at baseline, only have limited brain power. And that one is taking a lot of it right now. So when I saw the Syrian or the South Korean news, I just thought, you know what? I'm going to come back to this. We'll check in on it later. And by the time I had that video uploaded, like 3 hours later, it was over. So I just decided to put it back in mind, and maybe I'll talk to Ben about it later. That's what we're doing today in real time. So you're going to get some stupid questions here. First off, what is the rationale behind martial law solving loneliness? Am I reading too much into that? Was it just something stupid that somebody said?
It's like this.
I feel like I don't understand that.
So I think it is something stupid someone said. It wasn't said as a joke, though. I also think it's kind of like there's this whole thing people say of like the South Korean party, President Yoon's party, is like the incel party, kind of. And so that he is lashing out because everyone else was mean to Yoon. And so therefore we should all feel bad for Yoon rather than this guy's insane. And so that is kind of the language around it, is that they're like this extremist loser party, I guess. That's my understanding, but I only have the English interpretation of South Korean politics. So I'm not South Korean, so I don't know. But that's my understanding of the loneliness thing. I don't think it's going to get them anywhere.
But a couple more then. My understanding is that it was non-lethal, right? Nobody died or was seriously injured. Is that accurate?
No one is seriously injured. I do wonder what happened to the soldiers who got fire extinguished to the face. I mean, that can't be good for your lungs, right?
But they're probably going to survive that, right?
No, they'll survive. Yeah, no injuries or anything. Yeah.
So that's
no,
good.
Everyone's
It's
fine.
The kind of thing that can spiral quickly when that happens, right? Any sort of death or serious injury. So that's good news.
Mm-hmm.
The North Korean aspect. One of the arguments for this happening was that North Korea had infiltrated and there were agents inside of the South Korean government. Is there any legitimacy to that? Or is it like a
No, he just made it up.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, he just made it up as part of his excuse for why he needed to do martial law, was that the people in parliament opposing him were pro-North Korean forces, pro-North Korean communist forces who were trying to undermine him in the country. I'm sure he feels that way. That's just not the truth, though.
Is that
they just disagree with him, but they're not
so
North
is
Korean.
That it? What I'm hearing a little bit is like these people won't go along with my plans, so they might be the enemy. Is it like that expanded?
Kind of. It's kind of, yeah. I mean, he is very unpopular. 25% approval rating. People just really don't like him. It's rough. So I think it's kind of like, I'm trying to think of like an unpopular president we've had at that level. I don't know if maybe
really
like
low.
Jimmy. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't know if we've ever, maybe Hoover, but like that's so disconnected from the audience and us that like, I don't know if I can even make an analogy there. But yeah, this guy's a lone wolf. His party doesn't even hold a majority. So.
All right. So last question here, for me at least, is it wrong to view this as a sort of success for democracy in the sense that somebody tried to overthrow their government and it failed horribly? Like, not to say that this was a good thing, but am I crazy that there's a little bit of a takeaway that like good, that thing failed?
No, it's astounding. I mean, he declares martial law. It's 2 a.m. and the crowds just keep growing bigger and bigger, and they're fighting, and they're not afraid to fight. They're not deterred. And I mean, even seeing staffers inside the building are just taking it to the military. I mean, it's great. And it also, I think, goes to show that the old coup playbook, the one he tried to execute here, does not work anymore. I mean, there's just so much freedom of information. And the fact that he didn't even attempt, he said, I control the media now, but they didn't attempt to seize the state news agencies, not a good indicator of success. So it's brilliant for democracy. The fact that they showed up and they're willing to fight.
Right? Like the South Korean people won. That got it.
Yeah, huge win. And this guy, I don't want to say it's the worst coup ever, but it's rare that you try to coup something and then you lose your own job. So, not
All right, well,
great.
speaking about possible coups, you thinking about switching over to the Middle East, talking Syria for a bit, then maybe on
Yeah,
to Ukraine, and
tell
then
me
back to the
all
United
about
States?
Syria here.
All right.
Yes,
So
sir.
this is
Tell
where
me
the
all
brain
about
power is being
Syria.
focused. So as we're recording this on Thursday morning, Syrian opposition forces led by HTS Hayat Tahrir al-Sham have taken Homa,
Oh,
which, look at a map of Syria, they moved into Aleppo pretty quickly. And the thought there when that happened was like, hey, look at that. The rebel forces, the opposition is a little stronger, maybe better coordinated than we thought. And they quickly took all of Aleppo, advanced in multiple directions, north, east, and south, and now they've taken the next major city. So as the next one, let me get the map pulled up here just for reference so I can look at this. It's happening faster than anyone expected. The next major city that they're going to run into, I believe, is Homs. That's right. And then if they take Homs, which a week ago would have sounded crazy, but they're taking more territory now than they really have since the beginning of the Syrian civil war. West of Homs, up against the coast of the Mediterranean, is where you get the Russian naval base and major airfield. So Russia is starting to feel a little bit of a squeeze, which leads into a couple major issues here. I don't think they're going to stop anytime soon. Like, we might be seeing the beginning of the end for the Assad regime. And the reason I say that is there's a couple different factors here. First off, we're seeing that HTS, who previously was the Al-Qaeda branch under Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria, they're jihadis. A good podcast I really enjoy is called Generation Jihad. They had an episode yesterday that said the enemy of my enemy is also sometimes my enemy. So make no mistake, HTS, jihadis. Although possibly reformed and possibly somewhat nationalist, but they still have Al-Qaeda fighters and probably some Islamic State militants in their ranks. That's the group right now pushing over Assad. What we're seeing right now are not beheadings, are not mass executions, are not torture. We're seeing a lot of Syrian regime forces line up to surrender. They're fleeing their posts, and they appear, from what we've seen, to be treated relatively well, especially when compared with how we've seen other, prisoner issues take place in the Syrian civil war. This is not what you would see under Islamic State. So if you're fighting Islamic State and you're going to lose, you fight until death, because losing means some horrendous way to go out. In this case, HTS is kind of offering the regime soldiers, and they're dropping leaflets and flyers on regime strongholds saying, surrender. You'll be treated okay. And so far they have been. And that's led to more regime soldiers surrendering. In the last couple days, HTS has gotten their hands on at least a half dozen Russian T-90 tanks. So that is the most advanced Russian main battle tank right now. And Ukraine's only picked up a handful of those. But now,
do they know how to use tanks?
Broadly, yes. They use tanks during the course of the offensive. There's probably going to be some learning to be done for a T-90. But that goes back to, we're starting to see people kind of change sides. These regime forces lay down their arms, and they're probably going to be, it wouldn't be hard to co-opt some of those guys into using the T-90s. But that's kind of the least technologically advanced. They've got aircraft, they've got helicopters now, man-pads, man-portable air defense systems, surface-to-air missile systems. They just yesterday took a radar system for an S-300, S-400 air defense system, which Russia was freaked out about that, saying, look, if this falls in the wrong hands, as in Ukraine and the United States, it could lead to some major issues, because that is the radar being used to try to prevent Storm Shadow and ATACMS strikes inside of Russian territory. BM-30 Smerch, like a heavy caliber multiple launch rocket system, fell into the rebels' hands. It's not stopping. And the other key aspect here is Assad's allies don't appear to be doing anything. So it looks like the regime forces can't hold back HTS right now. Each town HTS takes, they get more tanks, and they're largely not suffering very many casualties. Russia hasn't done much. They do appear to still be in country. It doesn't look like they fled. There was reports a couple days ago that their Navy exited the Tartus naval base, but really it looks like they just went out to conduct an exercise. Maybe some cruise missile launches against opposition forces, but Russia just doesn't have the forces in Syria to be able to effectively stop and push back this rebel offensive at this point. Hezbollah sent the note over the other day that said, actually, we're not sending forces. Syria is good. They don't need us, which isn't true, but also Hezbollah is probably in a bit of a bind and can't do much if they wanted to. The Iraqi militias, there's a lot of talk about Iraqi militias moving in that are Iranian-backed, and the rumors were up to 30,000 strong, and we've seen about 200 so far cross into eastern Syria. It just doesn't look like any of Assad's buddies are quickly rushing to his defense. So, I mean, I think we're going to see more advances by HTS in the coming days.
So if HTS takes Homs, does that cut off Assad from the sea?
Technically, it would, yeah.
And so then he would have no other supply lines other than through Iraq, I guess Hezbollah-controlled Lebanon and Iran?
He's probably pretty safe passage through Lebanon. But, yeah, I mean, they've still got a significant open border with portions of Iraq. So I wouldn't say he's trapped. And then the airspace is pretty open, too. I mean, Assad just flew to and from, I guess it's not clear if he's back yet, to Russia. So it's not like the airspace is shut down. He'd be able to get in and out of Syria pretty easily. I mean, if he wanted to, he could be on the last flight out.
Now, what's happening with the Kurds? Are they standing by watching? Are they joining in? Are they fighting HTS or the other Turkish splinter group?
So you've got the Syrian National Army, SNA is up there. That is the Turkish-backed group that really was stood up. It used to be portions of the Free Syrian Army, but it was really stood up, trained, and equipped by Turkey to push back against the PKK. The Turkish Workers, I always mess up that acronym, but it's a designated terrorist organization in Turkey, and I believe in the United States as well. That is kind of one of Turkey's major aims in Syria, is finding them, eliminating them, but also Kurds in general. That entire area, whether it's Turkey, Iraq, Syria, they just don't really want the Kurds to establish their own independent state. So there's always some pushback against the Kurds. What we're seeing right now is it looks like the SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, on the kind of the northeastern side of the Euphrates, may be starting offensive operations against some of Assad's forces, kind of just seizing the opportunity. Not entirely clear at this point. HTS has put out some notes saying, we welcome Kurds. We're going to fight alongside you. We're not targeting you. We have a common enemy. And that's one of the things that kind of hints at this possibility that SDF is reformed. Or excuse me, HTS is reformed. Too many acronyms, dude.
Right.
Is that they're not, again, go back to Islamic State, they hate everybody. They hate Al-Qaeda to a degree, right? There's active fighting between those groups. But HTS is saying, hey, remember, Assad's the bad guy. Let's do away with him. And they put out statements recently saying their plan is to create an inclusive Syria, which is very different than what we would consider like an inclusive government. But what that's hinting at is there's not going to be revenge killings, and they're not going to subjugate, enslave, and execute people from minority groups. That's what HTS is saying. So you're seeing a lot of these groups not taking the opportunity to attack HTS, but taking the opportunity to attack Assad.
Wow. So do you think, if you had to put an over-under, does Assad make it to the end of the year?
At this rate, no, but it's such a dynamic battlefield. Right. I mean, the opposition forces have to run out of power at some point, have to run out of steam. They are advancing. They've taken more territory in the last 4 or 5 days than Russia has in Ukraine in the last year. So it's a very different fight, but they're moving very fast. They have, in a way, outrun their supply lines, but they're also then kind of working with local forces. So they're in a friendly country at baseline. It's confusing. I don't think they can keep this pace of advance up. But I would have said the same thing about the Taliban in Afghanistan a couple of years ago. They're moving too fast. They can't take this territory and hold it. But as we saw the Afghan National Army and Afghan National Police just kind of at some point, and this is the kind of tipping point, when the Afghans and Iraqis to a degree in back in 2014, I think it was, when the decision point came and they said, I can either fight and die or surrender and live. That's a real decision for a lot of people. This is their homes. They're going to be there. No matter what happens after the fighting, they're going to be there. And you're going to see a lot of people, I think, in Syria making that decision. Maybe it would be better to not fight, survive, and see what this next step looks like. I mean, if HTS is offering amnesty, essentially, to regime forces, who is going to fight until the last man, right?
That is a good point.
And if that's the case, then Assad's in real trouble. One of his he's still putting out that, like, they're fighting radical Islamic jihadis. And, like, yeah, that is kind of the backbone of HTS. But they're also apparently treating people well. It's a very different image than it was when this war kicked off.
Do you think ISIS is going to rise from this or going to surge? I know they still control parts of Syria.
Yeah, they're pretty beat back at this point, and they really haven't done anything yet at this point. So they do have a presence in Syria still. That's kind of the reason that the United States is in Syria, partnered with the SDF in counter-ISIS operations. They're pretty regularly, the U.S., carrying out airstrikes and direct action raids along with the SDF to kill, capture ISIS leaders. Haven't seen anything from ISIS in the last week, which is interesting. It's entirely possible they're just waiting to see how this shakes out and where they might be able to take advantage of the situation. Or, of course, is the possibility that they just have not had the ability to regroup to be able to take advantage of the situation, which would be good, honestly, for everybody. But yeah, there's a lot of folks watching Islamic State right now, and they're kind of not doing much of anything.
Wow. So, in theory, that's kind of what saved Assad last time, right? Was ISIS is on the rise, and so he kind of gets beaten back. ISIS gets beaten back through the Western coalition, right? But that's not coming this time. There's no Western coalition to defeat his enemies.
At this point, no. I've heard some arguments recently that Jolani is the leader of HTS, and I've heard some arguments that if the United States had the opportunity, they should take him out. Look, this is a guy who fought against American soldiers. I need to do a deep dive on this because if he was fighting with Al-Qaeda in Iraq back in 2005, he probably killed some Americans, probably was responsible for some suicide bombings, but I haven't seen that directly attributed. So I need, it's one of those things where I just need to do the research to make sure I have the exact events lined up. But if you're in Iraq fighting for Al-Qaeda in 2005, you're killing Americans, is safe to say.
Yeah. So
it's him. Then he went to American prisons. Then he teamed up with Baghdadi to start Islamic State in Syria. There's a strong argument for why the United States would want to kill that guy. Whether or not he's pushing aside Assad, he's still long been an enemy of the United States.
Can the United States and I guess the West, but also I'd say countries like Jordan and Saudi Arabia, Turkey, can they afford to have another country be ruled by a terror group? I know the Taliban in Afghanistan are a terror group, but they're kind of a different terror group. And I know HTS has denounced international terrorism like the Taliban has, but can this be tolerated? Or do you think HTS is truly reformed and that their new responsibility cast upon them has changed them?
I think HTS is smart in the same way that we've seen some maneuvering by the Taliban recently. All of them are now speaking to a global audience, so they're putting out messages that resonate with a global audience. And again, that doesn't make HTS good, but I think they're very smart with how they've done this. They look like the moderates at this point, especially compared to what Assad has done against his own people. And there's a very good argument here that, in general, the Syrian people would be better served under an HTS-led administration than Assad, which kind of tells you where we're at this point. I don't know that saying terrorist-led country is all that beneficial in this context, because that's a determination that we or other countries make. This is a terrorist organization or it's not. And there's clearly some lines that have been blurred there. I think another way to look at that is, can we do anything? And I think Afghanistan is a good example. What more were we going to do to affect that outcome? It's more about how do we handle it after the fact, I think. I don't know that there's much we could do in Syria right now to really affect the outcome of this, outside of maybe trying to get the SDF to go on the offensive in the east. But look, the U.S. has a lot of levers to pull, but it might be more, how do we work with governments like this rather than can we allow it to happen, if that makes sense.
Do you think people I've seen Turkey get accused of being directly responsible for this offensive? Thoughts?
There hasn't been any that I have seen. A couple things. First off, the Turkish-backed SNA didn't do anything until 3 days into this operation. So again, look at the October 7th attacks in Gaza. And everybody was saying this must have been coordinated by all the parties. And what we found out after the fact was the other groups knew about this, but they probably didn't know the exact day it was going to kick off, or at least were not a part of the actual operation taking place. Hence, Hezbollah didn't really start anything until the next day, and it looked like they were caught off guard. I get the same vibe here. I would be surprised if Turkey didn't have any idea at all, but it doesn't look like they were a part of the operation because they didn't do anything to take advantage of the opening 24, 48, even 72 hours of pure chaos when they could have. So, again, they weren't ready to seize any sort of initiative. In terms of overall backing for HTS, I've not seen anything overt. I mean, at this point, we've heard HTS referred to as Al-Qaeda, as Islamic State, as Israeli-backed, as U.S.-backed, as Turkish-backed. So take your pick. I've not seen evidence of any of those at this point. Turkey at times has used the SNA to fight against HTS, but other times they kind of lay down their arms and fight a common enemy in Assad. So the claims that this is Turkish-backed, I think, is kind of derived from the idea that Turkey had to have known something was happening. But in terms of the U.S. is conducting operations with the SDF in eastern Syria. We are partnered with them. That's not hidden. What we're seeing with HTS, there's no relationship like that I'm aware of with any of these groups.
Why do you think Assad's military is falling so quickly? Because if I recall correctly, last time around, they kind of fought well. They're taking back territory even before the Russians bailed them out. Is it truly just that the Western coalition bolstered them more than anyone thought?
Yeah, admittedly, this is something I need to do more research on. What my gut says at this point is that Assad maybe got too comfortable and thought this war was over because the ceasefire that went into effect in 2019 has largely held. And really the only major violations of that have been Assad and Russia deciding they're going to do more. So I think maybe he got pretty comfortable. There really haven't been major threats to his regime now in 5 years. Whereas the people kind of living under his thumb in places like Idlib were very much waiting on the day to actually do something. So I think he got a little bit comfortable. And I think maybe we underestimated just how impactful some of the Iranian-backed militias were. Hezbollah played a major role in fighting in some of these large battles in the western portions of Syria that are now falling to HTS. And then, Russian air power did play a significant role, and we're not seeing a lot at this point. There's been a couple pictures of jets slinging unguided rockets, which, who knows how effective that is. Russia's dropped some bombs on, somebody referred to it recently as characteristically civilian targets. Like they're hitting churches and hospitals. There's rebel formations moving across the open desert, and Russia's bombing a hospital. So the air power's not there. And I think a lot of things have lined up against Assad, but big picture, it's going to be something to study. I don't think we have all the information quite yet.
What does this mean for Ukraine? I guess it seems like Russia's kind of leaving Assad out to dry. So what does this mean long-term for Ukraine?
I think that's tougher to say at this point. We haven't seen the United States, for one, say much of anything about Syria. By and large, they've said, we're watching, we're monitoring the situation. We'll see if that changes. Russia, it's definitely a black mark for Russia, maybe showing that they're not going to be able to project power abroad as easily as they could have pre-2022, which shouldn't be that big of a shock. And we've we've seen mixed on that at this point, right? You go down into Africa and there's portions where Russia has taken a beating through their PMCs, but other areas where they've expanded. And I think what we're seeing in Syria may be an indication that they're overextended, or maybe not, again, because we have examples in Africa where they're probably in a better position today than they were pre-2022. What do you think? When you see the Syria stuff and you're trying to relate it back to Ukraine, what's your thought there?
I think, wow, I'm sure Assad really wished Prigozhin was still with us. Because, I mean, I don't know what happened to Wagner's forces. Did they just all collapse? Or did Russia take them on? But my understanding is that they're kind of disbanded and gone.
They split. So some of them, the average fighter went to or offered generally contracts with the Russian Ministry of Defense to go to a conventional unit. Some of them moved to other Russian PMCs. The more seasoned commanders, same thing. Some of them were put in charge of new PMCs under Redoubt, which was the Russian MOD deciding that they're going to stand up their own kind of PMC organization, so they have more control. So they rotated a lot, by and large, split up the Wagner group, but they kept the expertise where they could. They tried to so rather than just doing away with the guys that led the assault in Bakhmut, they pulled that experience and plugged them into another Russian formation. But they're not Wagner anymore.
Wow. Do you think that, I guess I don't think Russia really has any capability to come to Assad's aid, but do you think Iraq will? Do you think Iran? Do you think Iran will send, not the IRGC, but I mean, surely they have a real military outside of that. Do you think we'll see Iranian army soldiers in there?
No. I would be surprised. Iran's strength is by and large through their proxy forces across the Middle East, and we're seeing a lot of hesitation from those groups, even in Iraq, to move into Syria. There's a couple speaking up, but it might just be enough to maybe hold Damascus. I think there's a real chance, and it could go either way, but I think there's a real chance that Iran is looking at this, and the IRGC is looking at this and thinking, we lost Hamas. We lost 50% of Hezbollah, or whatever number you want to attribute to that, including 100% of their leadership. We are on the verge of losing Syria. Do we really want to lose some of our militias Hakarat, Hezbollah, Nujaba, a couple other ones in there. Anyways, I'm not going to try to go down the rabbit hole of those names. Maybe they don't want to sacrifice some of those militias to save what might be a failing regime, a failing Assad regime. I don't know. That's actually the video I'm working on later today. That's going to be one of the things I say we need to watch is, does Iran commit to this fight or not? And at this point, I would say they haven't committed.
Do they have to? Do you think for the survival of their axis of resistance, Hamas is gone, Hezbollah is gone, do they have to kind of prop up Assad?
No, I don't. I mean, it'd be a blow, but they also could use the opportunity to kind of seize power through other portions of Syria. They do still have a significant militia presence all across Iraq and in portions of Syria. So, and then Lebanon, that entire band across. So their man Assad might be out of power, but they're still going to have some influence in Syria. Maybe they view this as an opportunity to try to increase the extent of that influence. That's a big unknown, because that's the kind of thing Islamic State is going to try to do as well. They're going to see a power vacuum and try to seize upon it. But I don't think that's kind of the nature of this Iranian threat. And one of the reasons it's so challenging to fight back against is it's got all of these different arms. So when Hamas went away, it changed the Iranian architecture and their threat posture in the region, but it didn't do away with it. Now Hezbollah is knocked down, didn't do away with it. Even if Assad is gone, it's not going to do away with it. It'll just kind of reshape in a different direction. But look, it will be a big hit. Khamenei's seen Nasrallah, Deif, Haniyeh all fall just in the last few months. And Assad might be pushed out of power soon. It's a big hit to Iran, for sure. Would be.
Do you think 10/7, the October 7th terror attack, will be viewed as like the earth-shaking event in the Middle East? I mean, it was an earth-shaking event, but I mean, this is far-reaching, right?
Yeah,
I mean, now it seems like it's a direct consequence, Assad falling.
Yeah, that's something that if you, and I think it's a fair argument now. We'll have to wait to see maybe months or years after the fact to get all the information. One of the arguments right now is that the reason HTS moved is because Iran was tied up and Hezbollah was tied up and Russia was tied up. So they knew that kind of Assad's allies couldn't come to his rescue. And if that's the case, kind of the major catalyst here, then of course we can directly tie this back to the October 7th attacks. So that would mean those October 7th attacks saw essentially the destruction of Hamas, the death of all their leadership, the decapitation of Hezbollah, and possibly the future elimination of Assad. That would be that would be the biggest triggering event in the Middle East, I would say probably since the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq.
Do you think that does it secure peace long term, or are we just beginning in a crazy region?
Closer to the crazy piece. It's too hard to. I mean, you've got this former Al Qaeda group with Islamic State ties from their leader on the verge of taking over, but also saying that they're going to have a diverse country, which is something we've never seen any of those groups actually do. So it'd be the first time for a lot of things. I'd be hesitant to predict anything outside of like a week from now. And even then, a week ago today, it was like, what are the opposition forces doing in Aleppo? Do they actually think they can take the city? That was a week ago, man. So, yeah. It's chaos.
It's been the world's longest week.
Chaos is the way to put it. If it's okay with you, I want to go over to something that's a little more, I feel like easier to understand, and that's the war in Ukraine. And
yeah, we can. Or do you want to talk about the U.S. military intervention in Gaza before we switch over?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for keeping us on here. It's not necessarily U.S. military intervention, but it's a statement from President-elect Trump, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so he put out a truth.
Do you want to read it, or do you want me to read it?
Twitter. I'll read it. I want to hear your reaction, your thoughts. All right, so the statement here from Trump, he said, quote, "Please let this truth serve to represent that if the hostages are not released prior to January 20th, 2025, the date that I proudly assume office as the President of the United States, there will be all hell to pay in the Middle East, and for those in charge who perpetrated these atrocities against humanity." I feel like I missed part of that. Was there another in?
There is a part. He said that they'll pay a penalty harsher than the United States has ever inflicted, which does sound like a nuclear threat, or like, I don't know. Like,
well, Russia's
what do you mean? We nuked the country twice. Yeah.
All right, what do you think when you hear
that?
That
is true, but I mean, you're putting it on Gaza. I think he's threatening military intervention. I don't know if that's his intention. I mean, maybe it is. But like, what is he? I've seen people say it's a negotiation tactic. What is there to negotiate with? Gaza's gone. Hamas is gone. He's gonna. Does it really? Is Hamas gonna release the hostages and be like, oh? I mean, what can the U.S. military do to Hamas that the IDF hasn't already?
Not much at this point, honestly. In the opening days of the war, I think there could have been a different conversation. Like, maybe we could have done something different. But at this point, yeah, I actually saw this as him trying to preempt a negotiation that may be ongoing. They have never stopped. There have been negotiations ongoing every single day since this war began. And sometimes they get closer and they actually make it out into the public and there's a statement. Other times they don't go anywhere. I think it's entirely possible that he's trying to get ahead of what could be a negotiation to end the war. So he can then say, see what I did?
I could see that. I mean, isn't that what he did with Hezbollah, the Hezbollah ceasefire? As he said, it was all me all along.
I don't know if he said it, but I did see some people in the Trump camp say this is because Trump's coming into office. But look, if you look at the situation on the ground in Gaza right now, Hamas has been whittled away to near nothing. Israel is now conducting raids back in areas they've been in before. The Hezbollah threat has been reduced for the time being. There was a ceasefire violation, or a couple this last week, to say the least. But that front has largely died down. It's not out of the realm of possibility that sometime in the next 50 days, we would see a deal to end the war in Gaza.
Yeah, I don't doubt we'll see a deal. I just don't know what the threat's all about.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a lot that we could... I guess you could make the arguments that at times the Biden administration has been slow on shipping munitions, but my understanding is there was like a threat to do that, and then they just like backed away and sent everything over.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, it's going to be a interesting time. I mean,
it's possible he's talking about going after another aspect here. He's going after some of the Hamas backers in areas like Qatar and even Iran to expand operations in some degree, or sanctions in some degree, to anyone affiliated with Hamas. I did read it as a very, very much kinetic military operation sense, but
Right?
There are
Yeah.
still Hamas members in Qatar today, living freely, all
Yeah.
things considered, right? So, that's maybe something we could tap.
I mean, what can he? I mean, can't they just use I mean, surely he means diplomatic pressure when it comes to Qatar, right? We're not gonna drone strike a high rise, I hope.
No, but could we? Yeah, I'm speaking out of turn here, maybe. But couldn't we go snag him? If these are internationally
Right?
recognized leaders of
Yeah.
terrorist organizations, is there any way that the United States, maybe, right? Say Qatar, listen, guys, come on, we know, what the hell's going on here. This is ridiculous. We're gonna come get him if you don't. I don't know. It does seem like a loose end out there that is frustrating in a lot of ways that hasn't or can't be touched.
That is true. I mean, I guess we'll have to wait and see, but do you want to move north here to our friends in Georgia and Ukraine?
Georgia's actually another one. Yeah. So this is a good example of, look, I'm one man. There's only so much I can cover and try to dive into.
Mm-hmm.
I've spent that time on Syria in the last week or so here. So Georgia is one that I'm aware of what's happening, but not confident enough to speak to it. So could you fill me in on the protests there?
Yes. So they had an election October 27th, and the result was that the pro-Russia party, that I believe is called the Georgian Dream, won. There have been accusations of rigging. The EU, in a vote, called for the elections to be redone because they believed that to a certain extent the election was rigged or that it was faulty or not great. So all that happens, and now there are mass protests over it, in particular not just over the election, but because the new president, the new leader of the country, this new party, is saying that they're delaying accession into the EU or delaying the negotiations with the EU to enter in exchange for stronger relations with Russia. So now the people are rebelling. They're out there with firework guns, mobile barriers. It looks like,
cool.
Yeah, it looks like, I mean, this is a beat-by-beat remake of the Ukrainian Revolution, right? Where they rigged the vote, the guy comes in, pushes them closer to Russia after they didn't want it, and now they're in full-out rebellion. Recently, just 2 days ago, they beat one opposition politician unconscious. The security forces did. Now they've arrested another. This goes one of two ways, right? Either this keeps escalating and they fully rebel, and I imagine they'll have the same fate as Belarus and Ukraine, or Russia invades to, in Belarus's case, put down the protesters. In Ukraine's case, to try to assert that you're the owner of the country, I guess, for whatever reason you want to come up with why Russia believes it needs to invade Ukraine. And so I believe that'll probably happen in Georgia if it escalates, is that Russia will invade. They kind of already have in 2008, but yeah, not great. And I don't know. I mean, I really hope Georgia prevails here, but they're kind of, Ukraine's connected to Europe, right? They're connected to Europe. They are Europeans, and I guess you can say Georgians are European as well, but I don't know. It's different. They're on the other side of the Black Sea, and it just feels like they're on their own, I don't know. It makes me very worried seeing the footage. I really hope that the people can prevail here and that perhaps Russia's too occupied, but it just seems like Russia's using it as an authoritarian playground.
Okay, a couple questions here. When you say the election was rigged, is that something that there's evidence of at this point, or is it accusations, or where does that sit?
My understanding is that there have been several independent analysis of it that have shown that the votes are inconsistent, or that there are inconsistencies in the election. And the EU, I guess, saw enough to vote on it and to call for the elections to be redone.
Okay,
so
gotcha.
There must be something there. I personally haven't seen any evidence, but I'll take their word for it.
You answered my question. I was just wondering if this is the guy who lost saying it's made up or something like that, or if there's more to it. And if the EU has spoken up, that to me means there's more evidence there. the second piece is when you refer to one of the parties or one of the figures as pro-Russian, can you explain that a little bit? Because, like, are they pro-Russian, or are they just, is that a term being used? You know what I mean?
So it's a term being used because they are sympathetic and also want stronger relations with Russia. But polls show that 80% of Georgians want to join NATO, 86% want to join the EU. So he's very much acting against the will of the people. But his argument is, I'm acting with the will of the people because I was elected. But of course, as we know, the election was rigged, or it seems as though it was rigged, at least according to others. So,
Okay.
The protests are on day 7 now. I can't. Yeah. They just seem to get worse. Usually when you beat an opposition leader unconscious, it usually seems to get worse. I mean, I remember during Euromaidan when the Russian snipers were sniping protesters, right? The protests got more intense. So I wonder if that will be the same that happens here. But I guess you kind of see this everywhere, though, right? The more force you meet a protest with, the more
it can spiral.
Outrage it seems to get. Yeah.
And
so it's
something I was getting at there, and it'd be, like, we see in a lot of elections around the world people labeled as pro-China or pro-Russia. And let's be honest, it happens here in the United States, right? There'll be a House representative up for election. Somebody will say that's the pro-Russia candidate. And it's like, well, what does that mean? But when you get over to this part of the world, it is understandable that there's going to be, they're geographically very close to Russia. So it is not unusual for there to be groups of people and political parties that are genuinely pro-Russia. Like, they want closer ties with Russia. It's not the nefarious nature of saying that, like, a U.S. elected official is pro-Russia. This is their neighbor. And whether you agree with them or not, there's certainly some arguments in each of these countries to have closer relationships with Russia. So it's not completely made up or out of the blue that there could be people in these countries on Russia's doorstep that have a desire for a close relationship with Russia.
Yeah. I think the thing that comes down to is, it seems you saw it with Ukraine, you're seeing it with Georgia, but you also saw it with Poland and the Baltics in the 90s. These Eastern European countries are sick of being looked at like they are some corrupt backwaters, that they're foreign workers, for the rest of Europe. They want their own country. They want to be something. They want to be a country that people think about outside of, like, the corruption index. And they want the liberty and the freedom and the prosperity that comes with being in the West, and Russia just won't let them go. Russia won't let them go. They have their corrupt tentacles and everything, and they're just like an evil octopus. It's just, I don't know how these people can live so close and not. I guess they are outraged. They're out here protesting.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I can't imagine what it feels like to just know that, like, no matter what you do, this country is always going to be in your business. Which I guess maybe Canadians feel the same way, but we don't do that to them what Russia does to its
nefarious
neighbors.
Too, right? Like deep in corruption. Yeah, it's a good point.
It's just hard to get your head around that. I mean, these people, I understand why they want to go to the West. What does Russia contribute to its neighbors? In the West, you can get goods, you have freedom, democracy. I mean, I sound like a propaganda ad right now, but I truly believe what I'm saying. You get freedom and democracy and prosperity, higher GDP, higher living standards. Russia, what do you get? You get sent to the front lines to die in a dumbass war, and you live in poverty your whole life? And, well, the president of your country is the richest man in the world, taking bribes on everything? No one wants to be part of this. No wonder everyone's defecting. What does Russia offer anyone but guns and oil?
Did you hear the report that the North Korean soldiers weren't getting enough food?
I did hear that. I mean,
rumor, right? This is full-blown rumor mill. It was the GOR put out a statement saying it was a recording that the people watching the North Koreans were saying, like, hey, these guys are pissed. They're not getting enough food to eat. Then I saw some jokes like, if the North Korean soldiers aren't getting enough food to eat.
I mean, it's just like what is going on over there? I mean, the fact that they had a better living standard in the Hermit Kingdom than they do in Russia is absurd. I don't know what the end game is for Russia here long term. All its satellites are going to leave it, and I mean, maybe it just goes the way of Iran. It's just like, I don't know, it has a bunch of proxy groups and all of its friends are gone. Although Iran never had any friends anyways. But I don't know. What do you think? What do you think here with Georgia, with Russia's future, the future for Georgians?
Hope the best for the Georgian people. You said something that really hit home a second ago, which is that it's hard to understand that level of foreign meddling. And we talk it up here all the time, different countries trying to meddle, or there were some arrests made recently of people trying to recruit Americans for Russia. And like, we know that it exists, but having, born and raised here in the United States, I've never experienced it to that degree. It's hard to imagine what that would be like. I just feel like you're under somebody's thumb the whole time. And you're not actually making your own decisions would be exhausting. So I understand why, whether it's Georgia or anywhere around the world, people would rise up against that. We'll see. Hopefully it comes about peaceful resolution and the people get what they're looking for. I'll try to keep a better eye on it. I don't know though. It does seem like Russia's dealing with this stuff left, right, and center. But some of it does appear to be going their way. Like when you look at all of the protests and elections around the world that have changed over the last couple of years, I don't think it's accurate to say like the world has turned against Russia. I think there's still a fair amount of support in their direction for whatever reason, right? Whether it's legitimate or if it's coerced or paid for, whatever the reason might be. I don't know. I think every time one of these comes up, we kind of get the idea, like in Syria right now, like, look at that. Russia's on the run. They're going to be defeated. And then it's just another one of the things. My gut says over time that adds up, but Russia's got some real staying power, man. They feel like they're able to take some of these hits.
I agree with you. I agree. I think they're hard to get rid of, right? They're like a parasite, but I do think that they're slowly dying. And I mean, you saw here with Romania, right? They tried to throw the election there. Not throw it, but they promoted this guy on TikTok, the pro-Russia candidate. And what they found, Romania bans TikTok, and what do they find? They find that it was an entire Russian bot farm that was propping him up, and he went from millions of views to just like hundreds of views, basically overnight. So
he wasn't very good at it. Okay.
No, he wasn't good at it.
Really
he total propped up. Oh, no, I guess not. So I mean, it's just like, yeah, crazy. I mean, it's best wishes to the Ukrainians and Georgians and the Belarusians. I tell you what, it really annoys me when people talk about that they want the war in Ukraine to stop because people are dying, or they want the protests in Georgia to stop because people are getting hurt, It's just like, I don't know. It's hard to understand why someone would die for a dream that you've lived your entire life, right? Because it just seems so mundane to you. So,
well, where I fall on that
Ukraine
is,
at that, but yeah.
Where I fall on that is when people are arguing against what the people on the ground are arguing for. So if the Ukrainians came together and 98% or whatever number said, we're ready for the war to end, we're ready to cede any and all territory, we'll speak Russian, we'll downsize our military, we just want the fighting to stop, and that was the majority of the people, I wouldn't make an argument that they're wrong and that they should continue to hold out, because it's their lives, it's their populations, their cities, it's their land, even though that would be counter to U.S. interests in the region. I'm not going to argue that they should sacrifice themselves if they don't want to. That's where I kind of fall down on that on that whole deal. So I think I agree that I feel like that's at times what I'm doing with the war in Ukraine is trying to relay back to folks in the United States that, hey, there's a lot of Ukrainians that want to keep fighting. The majority right now, they want to try to achieve an end of this war on terms that protects them and their countrymen for the future. This is not the United States shoving down their throat, you will fight on our behalf. If it gets to that point, personally, morally, ethically, I would feel a very different way about how to present this conflict and how to report what's going on. But so long as the people on the ground are seeking a certain solution, I feel like it's best to present that, if you will.
Yep. If so long as the people yearn for liberty and they're fighting for it, then the United States should be their best friend.
Now,
I guess that's what being the leader of the free world means, right?
It's not going great in Ukraine right now. There was a podcast yesterday, War on the Rocks, Michael Kaufman, great analyst, who said something along the lines of, if the current trajectory holds, 2025 will be a bad year for Ukraine. We've seen Russia advance more rapidly in multiple areas of the front in the last few months than they have in a long, long time. Casualty figures are always a little touchy. I try not to base much analysis off that just because they tend to be so skewed in whatever direction you want. I would say at this point, the Russian attacks have been costly, not necessarily more costly than we've seen before, but they are taking a toll. And I don't know where this goes at this point, because it seems like Russia has the upper hand in a lot of ways. There's, in terms of Russia falling and not being able to fight anymore, there's two key things I've always kept an eye on. One is they take too many casualties and suffer too many losses. That is a thing for any country, in any military, in any war. I think a lot of people expected that Russia would have hit that point a while ago, and they haven't. So we don't know what it is. But that number does exist. The second is economic collapse, which is essentially enough of a problem inside of Russia to where the people say, what the hell are we doing fighting a war? I don't have food. To where the war stops, and Putin is forced to a degree, think Germany in World War I, right? It wasn't lost on the front lines per se. It was more that the people back home said, enough of this. What is going on? The country was starving, and but the military was not pushed back into Germany, right? That one's really, really complicated. I'd summarize it in one sentence there, which isn't fair, but
yeah, right.
But those two things, and in both cases, the Russian economy, for instance, we've seen over and over again things that we thought would have a bigger impact, and they haven't. And the Russian economy is certainly hurting. It is definitely not as good as it could have been should the war not have happened. But the people seem to be doing fine, and there's not really any pushback against stopping the war. So I don't know what Ukraine does in the next few months to drastically change the outcome or drastically change the direction that this war is headed in. Thoughts?
I agree with you. I think they're going to need a rapid deterioration of Russia as a state, right? This economic collapse they're going through right now, they seem to have halted it briefly, but it needs to go further. Otherwise, Ukraine's in big trouble, especially since now they've rejected the U.S.'s request that they draft 18-year-olds. They have rejected that outright today, so I'm not sure what the end game is there. I do think that, I'm not sure there's any military hardware they can get that can keep Russia back, just like they're just throwing bodies at it, right? So, I don't know. And I'm very skeptical that the Russian people will do anything about this at all, right? If the United States, actually, we know this. When Russia has taken more deaths in this war and more casualties than the United States did in all of Vietnam. And it was hell on earth here. Protests everywhere. The people would not stand for it. It was the same with the Iraq War, right? The second Iraq War. The Russian people just don't seem to care. And I'm not sure there's anything that can. Putin's promoted this apathy, that everyone should be apathetic towards the politics, towards the country and the government. Maybe you're right. Maybe the people will rise up if the economy falls, but I wouldn't be so certain. I think it's just going to be Putin's going to run out of funds, and the front will collapse.
There's not a lot of time left for that to happen. It's at this pace, the Ukrainian lines are moving in the wrong direction in multiple areas. They fortunately haven't collapsed to where there's been we really haven't seen that at all since the opening days of the war, where there's been a rapid breakthrough, other than the Ukrainian offensive in Kharkiv, that type of collapse. But it's a complete unknown, so I'm not going to put you on the spot and say when is it going to happen. But if that collapse you talk of is 3 years down the road, that might be too late.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm not sure what options Ukraine has left. to be honest with you, other than European countries intervening. I mean, I don't want to say they can't win the war. I think they can win the war, but I don't think a win looks like a total victory.
I think a victory looks different today than it did a year ago and different than it did 2 years ago. Yeah, as it sits today.
Absolutely.
Now, I want to get this out there real quick because anybody turned the show off at this point, they might have taken my comments about World War I and thought, that sounds a lot like what Hitler was saying. His justification for not liking the Jews was he blamed the loss on the soldiers at the front being stabbed in the back. So as soon as I started to go down that route, I was like, I need to make sure I clear this one up. That is not what I was getting at. It was that Germany was starving. They were running out of men. Look at the size of the country and the population base and the industrial base compared with the Allies. Like, they were losing across the board. They were not technically losing ground at the front in the West. Their offensives had been stopped, the spring offensives in 1918, and they were losing a lot of men, but they weren't like being routed and pushed back into German territory. So when I say it was, a lot of things on the home front, that's what I meant, not the Mein Kampf version of whatever that was.
Are there any Hail Marys Ukraine can pull? Like, is there like a magical Hail Mary they can pull that maybe it works off? Like what, they naval invade Vladivostok. I mean, that sounds really dumb. I don't know if that can work. Probably not. But like, is it something as insane as that they need? That naval invade Vladivostok, they take the city. Russia now has to move more soldiers that way? I mean,
I think we're at risk of looking at this like people did in World War I, where there may have been some big moves in 1914, maybe even 1915. They could have changed the outcome of the war. But by 1916, 1917, they were locked in a stalemate. And the defenses were such that it was so slow to move across the front, and it was so costly that major maneuvers like that weren't going to take place. And they stopped happening. And what ended up winning that war was just attrition, by and large. And I wonder if that's where we are now, because can you conceive of a vast maneuver by either side at this point, taking a large swath of territory, holding it, and then pushing to it? It's just hard to envision that. So I don't know that there's a singular operation Ukraine could carry out. If we follow that World War I analogy, what that would mean is Ukraine's options for victory are that they have allies that have fresh forces and fresh arsenals, essentially, stepping in to backfill them. That is the concept that helped to win World War I. That's kind of where my head goes, honestly. Because outside of that, what are you looking at? Ukraine's manpower is more of an issue today than it was a year ago. Their equipment is more of an issue today than it was a year ago. There's no indications that Trump is going to increase any of that stuff going to Ukraine. It's not a very rosy outlook, if I'm being honest.
No. Well, so let me ask you this. The last two big wars in Europe, World War I, World War II, they had stalemates, right? At one point, the lines are essentially frozen between France and Germany, World War I. World War II, Europe owned by Germany, waging war in the Soviet Union, but, that's going well at this point. The United States is the country that breaks a stalemate both times. Do you think a country comes in and breaks a stalemate here? Not the United States, but maybe another country, because
you were hinting at this last time we
happens,
talked.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe if Russia advances too far, close to the Dnipro, maybe further north in Ukraine, starts to threaten Kyiv, maybe. I don't know. Entirely hypothetical. I don't think there's any indications right now that that's about to happen.
Let me ask you this. So there's a meme online, Poland, right? They say it's the Texas of Europe. Just because they have this big military, they hate Russia, they're very gung-ho, or at least their leaders are gung-ho in the way they talk at times. Do you think that there's something to that Russia gets to the Dnieper, they break through the Donbass, and they fully take it? Do you think Poland enters this conflict, or do you think the Poland meme is perhaps a little bit overblown?
No, I think Europe, by and large, is much more hawkish on this fight than we are, and would I think everybody would love to go at it. Excuse me, would love to go at this with an alliance, the full NATO alliance. That seems unlikely for a lot of different reasons. But I think there's a lot of European countries that are arguably holding back right now, like ready to send in troops and are trying to just not upset a lot of other allies. But I mean, when you see some of the media coming out of Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, like, it's go time. Like, this is the time. What are you worried about? This has to be dealt with. Yeah, I could see that happening. That might be the next step. And I'd see any of those countries
this is
doing
the
it
war.
before France or the UK or Germany, right?
I could see the UK doing it. But I mean,
They're pretty
their
hawkish too.
army leader their army leader just said that they would get demolished in a major war, this is the same guy though that like 3 weeks ago said if we were asked to fight Russia and Eastern Europe, we would do it tonight. So I don't know, a lot of mixed views there from one guy. I don't quite know why he's doing that, but yeah. So, but do you want to, speaking of U.S. aid to Ukraine, there's been a shakeup here, the Department of Defense, who will be leading Department of Defense. You want to get into this?
Let's do that. Yeah, because it's like a maybe. It's a maybe around another maybe, right? But yeah, take us there.
Right. So our friend of the show, Pete Hegseth,
friend of the show.
We've spoken so nicely of him in the past. Pete Hegseth it seems like his confirmation's unlikely. He has resulted to, a letter came out from his mom where she called him abusive. In an email to him, she said it's abusive. Other stuff had come out that he had affairs. He has sexual assault allegations. In addition to sexual harassment claims, just not great stuff. So there's signaling that at least 6 Republican senators won't vote for him. So Trump has started to float replacements out there. One of the replacements is Ron DeSantis. And this is part of what I believe is a larger grand bargain, which is Ron DeSantis becomes Secretary of Defense and Laura Trump, who is Eric Trump's wife, becomes the senator of Florida for Marco Rubio's seat. That is something people are speculating. They really want her to run for office. They really want her in the Senate. And I think she will probably get the seat. Ron DeSantis, he served. I believe he kind of had a Tim Walz situation where perhaps he overstated his combat record and that he was a lawyer for special forces or something like that. I don't want to denigrate his combat record. I'm not sure on the details. Do you know how he served?
No, Navy. I believe he was an attorney, JAG maybe, down in Guantanamo. Not entirely certain.
Oh, Gitmo.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure he spent time at Gitmo, yeah. But we rotate a lot of forces through Gitmo.
Oh, okay. So it didn't mean he was necessarily torching people. He was just there.
No, he wouldn't have been. I mean, he may have been involved with some of the detainees, but JAG's not the one doing any of the interrogation techniques.
Gotcha. Okay. So he is a potential pick. He says he'll do it if he's asked. I think he probably has the votes. I personally do not care for him. I don't think he would do a bad job, though. He's very, like Pete Hegseth, he's very big on the culture war. But I don't know, he hasn't really leaned into it the way Hegseth has. Do you have any thoughts on it?
Not a lot, honestly. Again, it's kind of, we're talking about a maybe after a maybe. We don't know if Hegseth would. Yeah. So my thought here is very, very different path, but it's frustrating, man. I maybe this is old school or simplistic or naive even, but like, I want our leaders to be good people. And I got it. Like we've all made mistakes, 100%. And everybody's got something they probably wish wouldn't come out into the public, but it is so exhausting when people put up for top positions, this stuff just starts to flow. And like, I want good people that we can look up to, that like our kids in schools can be like, that's a good person. They're a role model. And I'm just like, policies aside, like, can we just have good people in these positions to serve as a shining light. They're out there, it exists. It's just so
Yeah,
frustrating. It seems like it happens
I'm.
all the time. But also, if I
I
ever
know. I
became a
agree with you.
senator, I would want to do the way where you just get picked instead of an election. That seems like a lot easier.
I do agree. It would
Yeah.
be nice to be an appointee, and then because then you can do the job, and the people be like, "Oh, okay." You don't have to make the case, right? Because
Okay.
I think I would need to be a senator first to know what I would be like as a senator. But if you're just like, so what do you think you're gonna do as senator? I'd be like, well, I'm just gonna like do stuff,
I don't know. I'm not going to tell you any of my policy positions because I just got picked. So I'm just going to kind of do whatever I think is right. I
Well,
like
your
that.
dream might come true because another pick for defense secretary is your senator Bill Haggerty.
Hey, all right.
So I'm start lobbying the governor. Start
Maybe
saying
I do that. Yeah.
maybe I'll be your pick, And the other pick is Joni Ernst, who is the senator for Iowa. She also served. And now the one that concerns me here is that they're floating Mike Waltz, who was the national security advisor that all our allies loved, that we loved, as potentially the defense secretary pick, which means if he takes that job, if he gets picked for that job, I fear that Richard Grenell is going to end up the national security advisor.
National security advisor is not a confirmation hearing position. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
you don't have to go through the Senate. You don't have to be likable. You can just you serve at the president's desire. So
And Waltz, for what it's
I
worth,
worry.
Waltz is more likely to get through confirmation. I haven't seen anything really negative about him come out. It seems like he would have the votes for
Yeah,
anything.
well, he would have the votes for anything. But as national security advisor, he doesn't need any votes. So Richard Grenell's been the one guy who's been on the outside this entire time. And if Mike Waltz ends up in the Department of Defense, Ukraine, NATO are going to be in deep trouble if Richard Grenell becomes the national security advisor. So not great. But I mean, who knows? Anything. Tulsi, though, seems to be controversy-free over at the director of national intelligence. Everyone else who was announced in her batch is under heavy scandal. But nothing really from her. What do you think?
I don't know. I keep waiting for some statement. Her buddy Assad is hurting, waiting for some statement of solidarity coming out, but it hasn't. Maybe she's biting her tongue, but
She's there on the front lines for him, man. Yeah.
I think there's going to be some pushback on that one. That we'll see. My concern, and I think I brought it up previously with Tulsi Gabbard, is again, I think there's a lot of people that could do that job, and it could still be an outsider for sure. I don't draw that hard line with somebody has to be in a certain establishment to be able to help lead that organization. I think there can be benefits to bringing outsiders in. I don't like that a couple times she's voiced opinions that are very, very close to what our adversaries have said. Again, I think it's a long stretch away from being a Russian asset or something, or an Assad asset or something like that. But I feel like we can find a middle ground where somebody doesn't necessarily espouse the beliefs of Assad and or Putin for some of these national security positions. So that's what I don't like there. But we'll see.
That is fair. So in other news, did you see this? So Maryland, they want a grand bargain. So right now, the Washington Commanders play in Maryland, and DC wants control of the RFK Stadium site, which is the original stadium where the Redskins used to play, and they want to renovate it. They want to redevelop the site. And Maryland's saying, well, in order for us to sign off on this, you have to give us one squadron of your Air National Guard fighter jets, and that is the grand bargain here. What do you think? I mean, what do you mean? What do you think? What a weird deal.
They just traded a squadron of fighter jets for a football stadium. Did I hear that right?
That's what they want. That's what Maryland will let DC develop the site and reattract the Redskins to DC in exchange for a squadron of fighter jets.
I don't know.
I guess the math here is that.
What's the conversion rate
the math here
F-16s to NFL teams?
So I don't know. Someone explained they thought that perhaps since the A-10 is going away and leaving Maryland, that a lot of people will be unemployed. So by getting another fighter jet squadron, that those people still have jobs. I mean, maybe not
Not
the
a lot of
pilots, but the
jobs, though.
ground crew.
It's not a ton for a squadron.
True.
I mean, it's
That is
something,
true.
but it's not
So,
anything like a manufacturing site. I don't know. That feels very third worldish, doesn't
yeah,
it? Like you can have this house.
it
I want a
feels
platoon of tanks. Yeah.
it feels third worldish. It also feels like very 1790 to 1812 America. You know, when they were just like, oh, let's just move the capital to D.C. because Thomas Jefferson wants to be closer to home, right? Like that's just very, very old school America. So it's an interesting suggestion. I don't know.
I'll be interested if this goes through.
That's what the Maryland.
On paper, It looks like you just sign, bam, some jets go over. But like Maryland's Air National Guard, part of their funding is going to be tied to having that capability. Does the DC, I guess DC has their own National Guard. So then does DC have pilots? Do they have pilots for those platforms? Do they have maintainers, weaponeers, targeters for those platforms? Where are they going to go? Do they have to stand up and there's so much little, when we move a unit on base to another place on base, it's like the world is ending. There is so much chaos and it's staying on the same base under the same unit. They're just like shifting down the street. The fact that this is, I don't know, maybe look, if it happens, great. I guess I don't really have a strong opinion. It just seems like there's a lot of details in here that would have to shake out just right.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on it. It just feels so bizarre that it's like, what are we doing here? But speaking of bizarre things, you see this health insurance CEO? I mean, this is not necessarily national security related, but I think people who watch this podcast are interested in assassins, and we had assassination in New York City yesterday. So we had a health insurance CEO shot dead in broad daylight in Manhattan by an assassin who is still on the run. They don't know where he's at. This is a city of cameras, especially Manhattan. City of cameras, and they cannot find this guy. We do know that he stopped for Starbucks, though, before shooting.
Get caffeinated.
The guy, so.
Yeah, I saw some really,
did you see the video? Yeah.
Yeah, and I saw some really nasty takes, unfortunately, because the people upset with general state of health insurance were kind of mocking the guy, which is too bad. But it's pretty wild. I mean, clearly this guy was singled out. This wasn't, for anybody who hasn't seen the video, it's not like this was a drive-by shooting and they happened to hit this guy. He was very clearly singled out, targeted. There were other people nearby, and the gunman just walked right past him. So you say that it doesn't have anything to do with national security, but I'd be hesitant to say that quite yet because we don't know who did it. And if there's a couple, and this is complete speculation for what it's worth, because we don't know any motivations, there is the possibility that there's some sort of domestic terror involved here, right? It could be one person doing something. It could also be part of something larger, targeting kind of a different class in the United States. That is complete speculation at this point, but there's the possibility that there's something larger here at play. I haven't really heard any arguments for any foreign involvement, but again, it's very, very early.
I also saw the nasty comments, people saying, I don't have the pre-authorization to care, all that other stuff. I don't necessarily I think it's very devastating for his family, especially since Christmas will come and there's going to be an empty seat around the tree and an empty seat at the table and a black hole in their hearts that feels like perhaps never go away. I do think the comments online are not necessarily about him, but you're right, about their general displeasure with the health insurance industry.
Yeah, put a face on that.
How impossible it is to deal with, and the pain and humiliation Americans feel dealing with it. So I think that's probably what it is. I'll be shocked. I mean, people say he's an amateur, but he has not been caught yet. How often does that happen? I mean, I don't know. I think at this point he's probably gone, right?
I have no idea. Yeah. It seems
how
he'll
long?
be caught quick, but also
this
New
is
York. New York's massive, man. I feel like it'd be not that hard to hide in New York. I don't know. I've never done it. I've never conducted an assassination in the busiest city of the world and tried to go on the run, so I can't speak for experience on this one.
Yeah, I can't either. But I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens here. What an interesting time to be alive, that's for sure. Any other news stories around the world you've been talking about? We have 10 minutes left on our time here. What are you thinking?
There's a couple things I want to get into with some videos, and then I got to wrap because I got to get to the airport.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk recently about Ukraine not holding elections, and I'm working on a video to kind of explain why that is. Not necessarily to justify it in one way or the other, but maybe provide some more context as to how, if we didn't hold elections in 2007 because we were fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, that would have been weird because life here was going on as normal. That is not the situation in Ukraine right now. They've got 20% of their country is occupied, 10 million refugees, another few million internally displaced, people on the front that can't vote, the entire country under daily bombardment from Russian drones and missiles, the entire country reachable by Russian missiles. So the idea of holding any sort of vote in that situation is challenging, to say the least. And it does feel like whatever the results are, you would have a huge amount of people that didn't vote, and then there'd be pushback on this isn't legitimate because the only air defense asset that was allocated for an election site was in Kyiv, which is heavily Zelensky or something. So it's just super messy, and I want to see what I can do to kind of help relay that information. Again, not in support or defense necessarily, but just it's not as simple as saying, let's have an election on Tuesday because they're in the middle of a war.
Right. Right. And I think, I don't know, I've seen people accuse Zelensky of wanting to be a dictator, but I think if I was Zelensky, I'd want any other job in the world than having to do this. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think it's just not plausible. And I think Zelensky's kind of stuck with this till Ukrainians don't want him anymore, till the war's over, I guess.
I think they would swap him out if there was enough pushback. I think there'd be ways and means to make that change. I just don't think there's some arguments right now that Zelensky would actually win an election between the two, but it's not to the point of people like wanting to push Zelensky out. I do have confidence that if it got to that point, there would be changes made.
It'd be, I mean, will Zelensky run against, so are they for sure not having elections?
They already missed them, I believe.
So in the past, I mean, at least here in the United States, we've had generals in the middle of a war run against the president. We had McClellan run against Lincoln. And McClellan, just as bad of a general as he was a presidential candidate, lost like a dog. And then during Korea, right? During Korea, or near the end, MacArthur threatened to run against Truman after Truman fired him for, do you remember what the reason was why he fired him?
He just undermined him, right? Talking bad about him.
I believe the official Truman said, I didn't fire General MacArthur because he was a dumb son of a bitch. I fired him because he wasn't respecting the authority of the president, which is the most Harry Truman thing that has ever been spoken. So there's that. But yeah, I guess, and they missed elections. Maybe Zelensky would do a better job. I don't know. I like Zelensky, though, but I'm an American, and I don't live in Ukraine, and I'm not serving either. So I don't know. What else is? I mean, we can cut it here, or do you want to chat for 5 more minutes here?
No, let's start to move it. I gotta get packed up and gotta get moving. So Ben, appreciate you moving this a day early to have this chat.
Of course.
Send you some updates tomorrow mid-flight.
Yeah, give me some pictures. I'm dying to see this. This looks probably cool as hell.
And everybody, thank you so much for your support, for tuning in on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. If we earned it, a review would be awesome. Sharing it, comment below, whatever. All of that stuff helps. But yeah, till
subscribe.
Next time, subscribe. Yeah, till next time. We'll see y'all.